On today's episode of Locked On Suns, we know the defense is a work in progress. Setting that aside, Bradley Beal, Yousef Nurkic, giving the Suns new life, some new options on the offensive end. How can that help the Suns long term? We'll break it down. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 7 seasons, a writer at Dime Magazine, the host of the Just Basketball Show, and the author of the Locked On Suns Insider Community. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen here on this Wednesday. Another Suns game day. Finally, a little break. Maybe we needed it. Wherever you are, however you are finding the show, thank you for being here. We are free and available on every single podcast platform, including YouTube. So just hit that button, subscribe, follow wherever you are, get an episode in your feed Monday through Friday, become an everydayer. Get locked on to the Phoenix Suns all season long. Joining us for the first time in a few weeks, regular guest on the show lately, Stephen PridGeon of Bright Side of the Sun, of PHNX, and great on Twitter, honestly. Just clips galore and good analysis everywhere. Steven, let's just get to it. We're going to talk about the offense, and you had 2 guys in particular that you wanted to highlight who have been bringing a new dynamic to this team on the offensive end, or maybe adjusting their own game. Fill the people in on who we're talking about and why they've been such a positive. I've talked about Beal a bit, but the less the guys that get a light shined on them a little bit less than the 2 main stars on this team.
Yeah, I think they get the light shine on them a little bit less, and they also should be featured a little bit more in those much maligned fourth quarter stretches where we're seeing the ball stick and stick and stick and stick. Mm-hmm. And that's Bradley Beal and Yousef Nurkic. Now let's start with Bradley Beal. Post All-Star break, he is averaging 16.3 drives a game. And we talk about how not having the ball stick is such an important piece to their offensive process. When Beal's got it, he's making quick decisions, and it's the cadence at which, the tempo at which he moves, that really is just such a positive contrast to everything that the Suns get from their big 3, because he moves at a pace and moves at a volume different than Devin Booker and Kevin Durant. So he's getting downhill, he's getting paint touches 2 seconds into the shot clock, 3 seconds into the shot clock, or even getting the middle possession, the middle shot clock or late shot clock paint touches that ultimately generate a reaction out of the defense and ultimately net somebody either with an opportunity to cut or opportunity at a clean catch and shoot chance. And that 16.3 drives per game is 7th in the NBA post All-Star break. And if you kind of look at the players that are on the higher end of that, with his 61.8 field goal percentage on drives, that ranks 3rd, only behind Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Luka Doncic. So to just kind of put it in perspective for what Brad is bringing to everything the Suns do on offense, you just really can't place a value on it. I'm curious, what were some of your initial thoughts on where Brad's been of late?
Yeah, I think to me, the biggest relief is that he's at a place athletically to do this, right? Like, I think even just kind of taking a step back and appreciating that you're getting a peak version of Bradley Beal physically is great. And this is an element that I guess I wouldn't have necessarily at the beginning of the season expected Beal to be the guy to provide. Not that I didn't think he could, but I sort of figured the breaking down of the defense most of the time would come from Booker, and we would see Beal kind of attacking closeouts or broken rotating defenses, and that all happens, right? It's tough to pigeonhole any of these 3 guys into they only do this because it is so balanced, I guess would be the best word for it. Maybe a little unstructured would be the worst word for it. But if they need it, right? Like they need somebody who can, I mean, even compare it down last year to some of the ways in transition and semi-transition that Booker was attacking the Nuggets, or it's always been a need for this team. So to see Beal step up in that way, it also simplifies the passes that he has to make. So I see a lot of people that are kind of saying like, oh, Beal's actually the real point guard. I think we've all gotten so caught up in that conversation that it gets in the way of being more specific with what we mean about stuff. And so Beal's ability to just get past that first defender, you know, get the defense to kind of collapse and then play off that. It's like, I mean, you could call that point guard, you can call that what you want, but it definitely just keeps things popping, and it really simplifies the game in a way that I think this team really needs. So I guess my question is just, how do they get him activated in those ways that doesn't force the ball into his hands too much? Because I do think there's a cap on this. He's not really just toss it to him and let him go to work type of guy at his best. So I guess that's kind of what I'm watching for as he keeps this strong play on, is like, all right, well, what do you go to create those opportunities for him that's not overdoing it?
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. And I think what you're speaking to on the latter end of your statements is right in alignment with where I'm at in terms of understanding where the Suns are, and where, while that's extremely solid, as they've been the best offense on per offensive rating in non-garbage time minutes since the inception of this recent four-game road trip. They've been the best offense generally in and a half court. So that speaks to where they are. Mm-hmm. But they can still be better, and they're leaving some food on the table, in my opinion. And that's with taking all that we just detailed in terms of Bradley Beal's drives and the many different contexts in which he's able to generate paint touches from those drives, and blending in the movement piece to their offensive process. I think last time I was on, we spoke in depth about them adding more movement to the offense by way of the use of Nurkic dribble handoffs in the empty corner and playing out of that type of action. There's that layer, which we'll get to in the Nurkic part in a minute, but keeping Bradley Beal in movement in addition to having him initiate offense, he's such a pressure point for them when they feature him to the optimized level of his usage. So not just him always initiating and playing point guard like you talked about. Send him off with some of those empty handoffs with Yousef Nurkic like we saw in December and January prior to his last injury, where it was those two playing, whether that be, like I mentioned, the handoffs, pistol action where he's pitching it ahead to Nurkic, free throw line extended, and then sprinting downhill, playing off of those handoffs inside or outside, and being able to invert the offense like that. I think they can do a little bit more with Bradley Beal and really optimize just how consistently he keeps the defense in rotation. And naturally, that's an offense in and of itself when you got Kevin Durant and Devin Booker space to the backside, Grayson Allen to pass away, and the defense rotating off balance. You know, that's literally an offense in and of itself. So I would like to see them lend themselves more to that and optimize everything that they have in tow.
For sure. And I guess, like, I don't even mean watching out for overdoing it as some kind of negative. I guess it's just, what types of environments can you create for him where that downhill magic that's working, the obvious kind of stop-start mid-range game in a pinch that we know he has, and then the shooting ability. It's just one of those things where when a guy has a lot of things working, I'm always just curious kind of what's the best, what is he most comfortable with. So I think the answer is pace, frankly, especially with him, maybe more so than even the other guys, is doing whatever you're going to do quickly, having him be a screener, having him be the guy receiving a handoff, receiving a screen, running a quick pick and roll, or obviously attacking a closeout. In that case, the pace is kind of on him to make that snap decision of what to do in those spots. So he's a really fun guy to watch within all of this, just because he has done a little bit of everything. And I guess, again, it's just what's the most comfortable and stable for him as we keep seeing these guys build reps. But let's jump to Yousef Nurkic. And similar question to me. What's the sweet spot with Nurk? And we talked about him a lot on defense on Sunday, but on offense, what is the optimal ways of utilizing him to get the most from him, complement what the big three are, and really win the minutes that he's on the court by so much that even some of the questions we have afterward, which we will also get to when it comes to the bench, maybe don't hurt you quite so bad. So let's get into that coming up next. First, today's show brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. So with all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, we'll keep it rolling here. Let's talk about Yousef Nurkic, who we've had some matchups come through this Suns schedule lately, Stephen, that exposed what maybe he's not great at. You know, guarding a team like the Celtics, guarding a smaller team like the Bucks when they went small. But at the same time, we know the value that he has to this offense, and I've pointed out a bunch throughout the year that when we're talking about a lot of these offensive numbers, you really got to call it the big three plus Nurkic a lot of the time to illustrate exactly what the kind of ceiling that they've hit at various points of the year really is. A 128 offensive rating on the season with the big three and Nurkic all on the court. When you include Grayson Allen, that number, I have it sorted the wrong way, goes not much different, you know? So it's really Nurkic that has driven that. But what have you seen from him lately in, it feels like this never-ending evolution of how to use him, how much to use him, and how much he can play and all these other questions. What are you noticing from Nurk's play lately?
Yeah, to kind of piggyback off of your the statement on the stats with Nurkic on the floor with the big three, with just Nurkic on the floor in terms of on-off, they're 10 points per 100 possessions better, 123.7, I believe, offensive rating. And to the maybe less trained eye, you might just say, well, obviously he spends almost all his time on the floor with the big three, and if it's not the big three, it's Grayson Allen. If it's not Grayson Allen, it's Eric Gordon. All these excuses. Okay, cool. But if you're looking at the actual play on the floor, who's setting all those screens for those players on and off ball? Who's prying these guys open on a high volume of consistency, regardless of who it is on defense that's navigating these screens to create separation for the big three to work in a less strenuous situation? Who's connecting when a play on the strong side breaks down and they pitch it to the second side and he's flowing immediately into a handoff, getting it off his hands quickly, or playing in that advantage and faking the DHO, going naked and getting downhill and putting pressure on the rim? Who are they pitching it ahead to when he's getting a rebound or he's contesting a shot above the three-point line? Who are they pitching it ahead to create pace and create tempo to get into offense? You know, who's connecting things with those dribble handoffs in the empty corner and playing in read and react, giving the offense an entirely new layer that's breaking the mundaneness that comes with playing pick and roll consistently over the course of 48 minutes. All of those things are directly aligned with Yousef Nurkic. And when they're featuring him to his optimized level, he's essentially operating like the point guard in the half court. No, we talk about all this point guard stuff, and I think it's too much, and it's too much in respect to the level of playmaking abilities that at least 4 to 5 players that they most often have on the floor have. You don't always have to have that bring it up the floor, you go here, you go there, you stay here, you screen for me there, and we're going to work out of that. You don't necessarily have to have that when you have multiple players that can initiate offense and multiple players that can function as a primary playmaker on multiple possessions and do so from different contexts of offense. Nurkic does his often from inside out, and we talk about the Suns needing to invert their offense. that's literally what he brings. He doesn't catch it in a post to score all the time. A lot of times they have to implore for him to turn his back and score because he has a mismatch, because he's always looking to get the ball to one of the big three or Grayson Allen when the defense is sucking in and they're in rotation. So just seeing him continuously be used like that is important. I'm curious, what have you been seeing from Nurkic in this stretch recently?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like you said, he mixes it up to where it doesn't just have to feel stale of set a screen, get a mismatch, or set a screen, slither through it, get a guy on your back, go to work from mid-range, or even not go to work, but, with KD, it's a lot of just pull right up. But whatever those maybe less creative moments are. But I have to admit that watching him more and more over the course of the season, I bring it back to the first thing you said of how just solid he is as a screener. And we know what he can do if he has to catch it on the short roll and flip it out to somebody in those spots if the defense tries to get the ball out of Booker or Beal or Durant's hands. But even if he just catches it and goes to the basket, obviously there's the Butterfingers moments and there's some awkward layups, and he doesn't always look at the basket when he takes shots and some of the weird stuff about Yousef Nurkic, but he can just do that also. And so it really is the versatility of all these little wrinkles. And I have a couple other numbers that I wanted to throw out, kind of even back to what we were hitting on with Beal and his role in the first segment. But I think it's a real strength for this Suns team to not have, even when we talk about what Book does when the offense is running through him or Durant or whatever, they don't really have anybody that dominates the ball despite some of those awkward moments. Book is leading the team in touches per game with just shy of 73. For reference, Domantas Sabonis gets 93 touches per game. Jokic gets 100. And that doesn't mean those guys are selfish. Of course they're not. They're playmakers. Halliburton, it's a lot of guys that primarily look to pass, but there's still, everything is kind of running through their brain and through their hands. KD's a little bit behind that. Beal is a little bit behind that. And then Nurkic is actually not far behind when you're just looking at touches. He's at 55, so 18 or so fewer than Book on a per-game basis. And then when you look at screen assists, which I know is everybody's favorite stat because it became a Rudy Gobert meme, but at the same time, it puts him in very good company as well. He's fourth in the NBA in screen assists just on a per-game basis, behind Sabonis, Gobert, and Jalen Duren in Detroit. And again, I think all those things of the comfort they have with the ball in his hands, the value that he's providing as a screener, I think your point on especially sometimes half-court pace, but I think with some of the pitch-ahead stuff and whatever that you were even mentioning with Beal or anybody, he can be a positive driving force on that side of things as well. I think it speaks to being way more well-rounded than I think he got credit for, and way more well-rounded than the centers the Suns have been working with for a while. Not just Ayton, but really anybody. He's kind of pulling a lot of the other things that we've seen work with guys that have run pick and roll with Booker over the years. My question with all of this, though, and we're trying to stay a little more, big picture, not getting into the negative as much, but I have to ask you, because we're hitting on these two guys. We talked a lot about Booker and Durant, obviously, all year. What do you see watching these games when the Suns go away from what works? Because we're talking about all these things that work. You said it, the offense, even over this weird 4-game road trip, was elite. A lot of numbers would tell you that. I listed the lineup data with the big three and Nurkic out there. Elite. But we know it doesn't always look elite. Is it just as simple as pace to you? Is that the end-all, be-all? Or what do you think goes wrong when they stop pushing the buttons that are working for them?
I think some of it starts with the defensive side of the floor. Because naturally, if you're taking the ball out the basket, you're going to be going up against a set defense. That's going to take away some of your flows. That's going to take away some of the pace that you were alluding to. I going to slow the game down and keep it more half-court oriented. And the Suns have been trying to make – they have been making efforts, and it's showing up statistically a little bit now. That's indicating that they're trying to play a little bit quicker. But in addition to that, I think if you're looking exclusively in the half court, I think the featuring of Nurkic certainly is one entity of it. They're starting to run with their small ball renditions. They have some optionality in that post All-Star break with Royce O'Neal and obviously Bobo as well being in the main rotation. They're starting to run some more of their man offense instead of it just being 5-out spacing, attack a gap, or playing with small pick and roll, slipping and ghosting. They ran a little bit of elbow action against the Milwaukee Bucks. We've seen them go into some of their dribble handoff variations in the empty corner. And we've even seen them do a little bit in a two-man game with Royce O'Neal, which is another piece that I feel like they're leaving food on the table in terms of usage, especially in those lineups, because he can be featured a lot like Nurkic, inverting action, playing off a pistol, playing off of handoffs, all of that fun stuff. So I think just generally movement, not just being in pick and roll. Can we get into a handoff, just a dummy bluff handoff on the backside, swing it to the second side, and then flow in the pick and roll? Get the defense to toggle their defensive responsibilities and positioning within that a little bit. Can we generate a little bit of movement before we ultimately get into it is a question. If I was on the team and I was a coach, that I would be trying to ask the players and try to be implementing into our fourth quarter process. I think that's something they have to nail. And until they consistently do so, we've seen them do it in stretches. We saw it against Cleveland, though they had ups and downs in closing that game. We've seen it in games even prior to that one. They just have to find consistency and sustain that flow. I think they will, but obviously we're running out of time, Look at the watch.
Yeah.
It's March 19th. Playoffs are about a month away now, so, you don't have that much time to work with, so they got to get busy.
Absolutely. To jump off your point with some numbers too, they've had success at stretches of the season running off of misses. And yet you look at the overall rankings of where they are, they do that the fifth least in the NBA. And that has really gone down. It was really far down at the beginning of the year. It was up during the middle of the season, and it's gone back down. And I think, that speaks to the connection between the defensive and offensive sides of things that you're talking about. And I think even just the demoralized sense that we sometimes can feel from this team on the defensive end, and that definitely happened in that Milwaukee game, not to overreact to that one example, but the numbers kind of back it up. And I can't help but think, if I'm putting myself in their shoes and the effort isn't there on defense, teams are filling it up from deep, or a certain guy is going off, it's hard to maintain that, flip the switch, flush that possession down, and let's, sprint out on offense right after that. So I do think that there's a emotional connection between those two things, whether we like it or not, that I think probably gets in the way for a lot of teams. That being said, there's a lot of good defensive teams that also don't even run off of misses. So it's not a must-have, but again, I think if we're just trying to find pockets where this team can exercise every little advantage that they can and make up for the fact that they're not going to be orchestrating everything at all moments of every possession, then those are important. The other part of the more meticulous half-court stuff, even if it's fairly simple at the end of the day, it does take time to set that stuff up. And so if you're not initiating something until 13, 14 on the clock, even just a simple dribble handoff from the elbow, or one off-ball screen that flows into that, or that's just more and more seconds. And so you have to be ahead of things, ahead of schedule, in order to have that stuff really work the best that it can. Let's close out the show talking about the bench. Why are guys seemingly regressing in terms of their opportunity, their trust from the coaching staff, their execution in their role? Does it just feel that way? Is there reality there? Who should be playing? A lot of questions, and then we'll look at the upcoming 4 games this week to see whether the Suns can get back on track. Coming up next. First, today's show brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Do you ever wonder what adventure could be around your next corner? Well, our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capability to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes. With class-exclusive Google built in, you have your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone and dealing with messing around with all of that while you're supposed to be looking at the road. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system, making the 2024 Nissan Rogue the perfect midsize crossover for your next big adventure. In addition, the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder has room for up to 8 expansive cargo capacity, 284 horsepower, and up to 6,000 pounds towing. When adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. So, take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, and even the Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. All right, let's close out the show here, Stephen. So, I think the Milwaukee game is a bad one to look at with the bench conversation because it did turn a little desperate. They clearly wanted that win. It was relatively close even into the fourth quarter, despite how ugly it may have felt. It really only was a 10-point game after that third quarter run. So it's one that you can kind of explain away why some of the bench guys saw their minutes dissipate. I know some people felt like Eubanks might have been a nice change of pace to go back to against Portis after he scored 6 quick ones in that second half and other things, but that feels like picking nits. But in general, we've talked about it a lot with Bol. People have wondered what's going on with Thad Young. Eric Gordon has been very up and down. What's your read on this bench? And I guess when we think back to the best moments that these guys individually have had or how some of the units have looked, what do they need to get back to over these last handful of games to, at the very least, just have enough guys that they trust to not run the starters ragged and start to have, bad returns on what those guys are doing? Because I do think that starts to happen at times as well.
Yeah, I have been very much on the side of Royce O'Neal will likely end up starting for this group. And I think
Me too.
I don't think that's I don't think that's something that's like breaking news. It's not like this Aristotle type of philosophy that I'm spitting right now.
Surprised, man. People don't appreciate that I have some problems with Grayson Allen's defense as if I'm like being personally insulting to the guy. I'm just saying he's playing small forward at times or like having to guard these guys that he should not have to. That's really the problem. It's a roster thing to me.
Correct. And I think you gave me a perfect segue into what I'm getting at. You talk about the bench needing a spark. You talk about the starting unit and needing more defense. A simple swapping of Grayson Allen and Royce O'Neal gives your team a different type of feel starting games and then when you layer into your rotation. If Royce O'Neal is out there with the starters, obviously he can play a lot of those same type of defensive positions that Grayson Allen does, in addition to bringing size and a more defensive-minded balancing into that starting unit. By the same measure, looking at the rotation in terms of reserves, and Grayson Allen's with that unit, now you're getting that spark plug in addition to Eric Gordon, in addition to potentially Bol if he's in rotation consistently for that game, which he should be at this point in the season. It gives a different type of look. They need that balance, in my opinion. I think it's missing in spurts and where they're looking to get stops in that starting unit. And they can't really look at, okay, this is our defensive-minded guy, so we're going to go directly to him. Kind of like if you want to look at it in a similar lens, how Josh Okogie was when he was starting with Kevin Durant in the lineup after they traded for him last season around this time. That's that type of piece that I feel like the starting unit is missing at times. And just because Grayson Allen doesn't start games doesn't mean he won't close games for the Suns. And it doesn't mean that they have to lose the value that five-man unit when he's with the starters brings, which is one of the 6 best lineups in the league for lineup 5-man lineups that spent over like 400 minutes this season. That net rating, that offensive rating in particular, you can't replicate. So that's not to take it out of the rotation, but it's just a tweak. It's featuring. And I think by nature of that, bringing more balance to the starting unit and bringing more of a scoring punch to the reserve units, I think you find a little bit more sustainable balancing of your lineups from there.
I think when Okogie comes back to, assuming, I don't know what's going on there, that it also just sort of creates a little more like for like substituting, right? Where you can think of, I don't know exactly, the big three staggering and everything has also changed over the course of the season. It's hard to exactly say even what that looks like, but you just think of it in a basic way, role-wise, right? Like Allen can come in and do a little bit of what Beal does. They'll be used in similar ways, or even you could say Booker, depending on what they're running and what the opponent's lineup looks like and everything. Same with Okogie kind of coming in for O'Neal. It's not perfect, it's not exact, but he can probably have his primary defensive matchup be the same guy that O'Neal was guarding. Gordon, probably similar type of thing with whether that's the guy O'Neal was guarding or one of Booker Beal, slide in there, do some of the same things on offense. So I like it from that standpoint. I think the question that I have is kind of how do you build the lineups when not all of the starters are not all of the big three are on the court. I'm pretty convinced at this point that Bol needs to play with Yousef Nurkic more than Drew Eubanks. The numbers show that. I think the eye test kind of maps that out. I just think Bol needs as much kind of stability and size as possible. I think more playmaking to set him up. It just feels like Bol and Nurkic, you can kind of do the zone a little bit better if you want to do that with Nurk versus Eubanks. It just seems like that is showing itself. Maybe that makes things a little more complicated to always get all of that locked in, but I think that I feel pretty confident saying now. And then beyond that, it's like, yeah, I guess with Grayson, if he were to start coming off the bench, does he fit better with like a Beal, Eubanks, a Okogie type of lineup? Does he fit better as somebody to, be a spacer when KD might be kind of in ISO mode and posting up? I think that's what you start to ask. And that's why I've been agreeing and saying some of the same stuff for a while now, Stephen, is I'm like, you need time to figure that out. So if the coaching staff is in lockstep with what a lot of us are thinking is ultimately going to be the destiny, like, should probably be trying that now. And there's been these moments with injuries where I'm like, okay, well, Royce started, so then maybe they just keep him when Beal comes back or when Book comes back. They haven't done that. So I don't know. But yeah, I think we're on mostly the same page. Let's close it out with this. What game or what opponent worries you the most this upcoming week as the Suns have a back-to-back against Philly and Atlanta, both without their best players, and then the Spurs, who you would think would be beatable, but obviously surprised the Suns 5 months ago in a much less experienced version of this team, was able to beat them once and push them the other, beat them twice, right? And only one of them was close. So maybe it's the Spurs, maybe it's one of those other teams. What are you looking at?
I think it's that matchup with the Spurs, and it could be either one of those two. Victor Wembanyama, he's here. He's not this like fun-loving rookie that's cute and is not on like a winning team. No, they're very much performing like a playoff team when he's on the floor. It's when he's resting that we see the Spurs look like the team that's not really competitive with the playoff contending level teams. But when Victor's on the floor, he just gives so many problems, offensively and defensively, and it's almost impossible to account for him. He's just so fun. That dude is, and he's like good on top of that. Like, I think I need to reverse that. He's good and he's fun, definitely in that order. And yeah, I just think he's just such an imposing type of player that he can, change things, and he makes navigating on both ends of the floor tough. So I would say those games against the Spurs. Also because at this point in the season, teams that you kind of would look at as regardless of who's available or not, as like scheduled wins, especially at this point in the season, the back end third, those games don't always come as easy as you would think. And I think we saw some of those type of results generated this past weekend. So what do you think about these 4 games this weekend? Who might be the toughest?
I mean, look, it's one of the ones you just hinted at with this past weekend, the Hawks. I know that last game was with Trey on the road on that Friday night, but they're a team that can go off regardless. DeAndre Hunter's been filling it up for them in a bench role, which is a little unique. I know they just lost to the Lakers right after they beat the Clippers, so they're by no means consistent. I'm not predicting that the Suns will lose to this team, but when you just look at the things that have given the Suns issues, it is three-point shooting. It is kind of teams that I think lean toward offense because that's going to challenge the Suns' weak point, which is defense. These shootout games have been a problem. We know the Hawks can also get on the offensive glass with Capella and Jalen Johnson and those guys. So second night of a back-to-back, yes, it's at home, but that would be a concern for me. And, if DeJounte really is feeling it, that's not much different. It's a worse version, but it's not much different than what Dame just did to this team. So that one just feels like it would kind of poke at a lot of the weak points that we know the Suns have. But ideally, this week is the last soft spot of this schedule. They just had a disappointing stretch. You want to win all four. I mean, that's my mindset if I'm in that locker room is these are 4 teams we can beat. These are 4 teams we need to beat. 2 of these games are at home. The other 2 are a nice travel schedule because it's not that far away and you get to stay overnight for the whole thing. Let's take care of business. We'll see if they do it. I'm sure Stephen will have writing over at Bright Side of the Sun. We'll have recaps of those 2 games Wednesday night and Thursday night for you guys on this show. And I would say enjoy. We'll keep it optimistic. Enjoy the games. I'll be back with you after the buzzer on Wednesday night.